I think, Amit, let's get started. I think while others join, I think let's do the introduction so that we can give Gabriel enough time. Okay, so let me just kick it off. Hey, for all who have joined, welcome to the webinar. We have a very exciting session planned today. So just a quick slide on the ground rules. I think we have Gabriel, who's going to spend around 35-40 minutes doing a presentation and then doing a demo. I think you should keep your microphone on mute and the video feed switched off. Please share your questions in the chat window. And towards the end of the session, we'll keep 15-20 minutes for discussion on the questions. If all questions are not answered, we actually plan to publish a small blog, right, on the AGC website after we are done with the session, where we'll post the recording and post further answers to questions. With that, let me just move to the next slide and spend a little bit of time first introducing Gabriel and then the topic, right? I think we are very delighted to welcome Gabriel Walt, who's I would say a leader at Adobe, who's a product manager for the web experience management. He looks at various site features in the AEM suite, like the core components, the template editor, the style system, and the responsive layout, and has been an evangelist for headless content management and a combination of content management across various channels. So he's going to take us through a reasonably detailed presentation on letting us know how to manage content in this ever expanding set of channels where you have multiple content systems, but also looking at the power of headless management, where you actually are using channel agnostic approaches, where you use experience fragments, which are enabled now by microservices and containerization. So I think Gabriel will talk a lot about how to use both traditional and headless content management. He will also give us a little bit of a demo at the end, right, on how to make some of these things work, right? So I think with that, I don't want to take any more time and hand this over to Gabriel to start his presentation and share with us his details and his expertise on this topic.
Okay, thank you, Varnik. Welcome everybody here. And this is a session I also gave in a similar format at Summit, but here it will be a little bit different with the demo. And so for those of you who saw it, it's a refresher. For the other ones, I think you will be interested by the demo as well. And yeah, basically headless content management is really challenging us in many ways, because how does it basically relate to the traditional content management system? How can we have both, and when to use which is really a number of questions that I get a lot, and I would like to shed a little bit of light on this session. And let me start with a little story, something that I hear a lot. It starts usually with marketing, who wants to create a more interactive and personalized web experience. And for such kind of requirements, IT obviously wants to go with some JavaScript framework, and to go all in, maybe also choose a headless CMS, so that they really feel they have all the tools needed to build a modern web application. And yeah, it's usually a project that's kicking off well, and that marketers are really happy with also, because they can efficiently create the content in a form-based editor. They are really quick in creating that content. And the initial go live is usually a big success with the visitors, customers of that company who love it. They can do what has been promised in this application. But the interesting part really starts after the initial go live, because what I hear is when customers come back to us and they have troubles, usually the first thing they hit is to roll out to more markets. So it's easy to have a success for one market in a very specific situation, but then how do we manage that content localization for many different markets? There are different needs, and you really need then to build a lot again if you haven't chosen a content management system that has really tools for that. Then you also, when you do a major content updates, have another dependency on IT here, where usually the whole layout is hard-coded in the application. So when the content doesn't fit anymore that layout, marketing cannot do that change in a self-service way. They have to go back to IT to make the changes. And this obviously results in further delay of the go live, and marketing doesn't feel that agile suddenly anymore. And it gets a bigger problem when actually marketing wants to own the end-to-end customer journey, when they feel that there are some things in this customer journey that they want to A/B test, to try out. They want to be changing some content, see how that how that works, move things around, and there you see that it's actually each time something that has to be deployed and that has to be implemented. So the agility there really suddenly is not that big anymore. And where I see that a lot are struggling the most is when you really want to reuse the content. Obviously, typically in a headless CMS, you could imagine you have all the imaginable API for the content to reuse it across many different channels. But this is only something that is reality for developers. Marketing people, they cannot reuse the content from one CMS in the other CMS if there hasn't been some integration that has been built. So they will do a lot of content that will be then siloed or that will be copy pasted, and it really becomes complicated to manage all of that in a consistent manner. And so this is where I would like to show you a little bit today how you can, for headless use cases, keep actually the authors really in the loop, how the authors can be enabled to control these experiences, how you can still deliver all of that headless with JSON, and how you can really take best of both worlds with AEM, and how you assure that with that choice you're flexible all the way for all possible situations. And really to start, I would like to give you the show you that we need to distinguish two different headless things here. There is headless delivery and there is headless authoring. And many times when we speak about the one of the two, we also imply the other. And maybe when we speak with someone, one thinks about maybe the delivery aspect, and the other person thinks about the authoring aspect. And I think this is causing a lot of difficulty in communicating these topics to people when we don't distinguish the two. So headless delivery is really that we send the content as JSON. And headless authoring is that the author doesn't mind yet about how it will look eventually. It's the authors are working on a form-based interface, and we'll see later how that is assembled in something that has a visual appearance. And both really have benefits and downsides. So at delivery, it's really great to have JSON delivery, to be able to have something more interactive, personalized, but it also adds dependency on some frameworks, JavaScript frameworks that can be really fast paced. So what you build maybe is then out of date in 2 years, 5 years for sure. And it's also complicated really to keep up with all of that. You maybe don't have also necessarily the knowledge for that. Maybe other people have the knowledge, you need to bring them in the team. That is something that sometimes is a benefit, sometimes is a downside. And on headless authoring, it's also the benefits that you can scale the content creation much more efficiently. You can, by not caring about how it looks, you can be efficient, really just mind about the actual content, but you don't have control over the resulting experience. So this also is a benefit and a downside, but most of the time, authors at some point want to get, again, control on the experience and on how it looks in the end. So the question here is really, how can we get both, or those we really need here of these two aspects when we need them? So first, let's look at the authoring part, and let's compare the traditional and the headless authoring part here. And in AEM, we have two concepts for content reuse. One is experience fragment, and the other are content fragments. Both have the name fragments, but they are quite different. Experience fragments are really for in-context editing, so you can preview the content as it will be then on the resulting experience. So it's basically a piece of content that you cut out of an experience as it looks, and you author it in a central location. So you preview still how it will look, but it's just that you copied it outside of the context so that you can reuse it in many places. Content fragments, on the other hand, are really form-based, and you cannot preview how it will look. That is something that is taken care of later. When you place it in context, then it takes the appearance that has been defined for that context. But both concepts really work technically the same way. Both are stored centrally in a place, in an admin place where you have that reusable content, and both have a concept of fragment. So you can have multiple fragments in that admin, obviously, and every fragment can have multiple variations so that you can account for differences that need to be made for specific contexts. So when that fragment suddenly is used in one page, you maybe want to use one variation, and in another context, you maybe want to use the other variation, but you can still edit both variations centrally so that you can keep things together, basically. Then on the channel experience, that is on the page, on the website, or on the app, you have a page. The concept, that's where we have the concept of page in AEM, and in that page you have some components. So you'll place on that page a fragment component that will reference one of the fragments. Basically, you reference the fragment that you want to have located on that page. And you can move that around. You can have it another component above, below, next to it, whatever you can, everything you can do in AEM, obviously. And all these fragments also have something that defines their content structure, some content structure definition to say how their content is really structured. So now let's look in the case of experience fragments, how this works in practice. So experience fragments are basically an assembly of components that you take out of the page and store locally inside of the variation of your experience fragment. And the template, so the content definition of the experience fragment, is basically saying what components are allowed in this experience fragment. Maybe it's providing some mandatory components that you need to have in some experience fragments, or maybe some layout for these components can be defined also on the template of the experience fragment. For content fragments, it's looking similar, but the content structure, if I start from the other side this time, the content structure is defining the fields that the author will be able to edit. So like the database definition, the table definition of your content fragment. So which fields can the author really fill out, and what is the type of each field? Is it a number, a text that the author can fill out? And then on the content fragment variation, the author can fill in these fields, can enter the content, and then eventually you take a content fragment component to embed that content on a page, and it will display these fields with a specific markup that you can also customize, and that will make this content really take the appearance that you defined with this component. So maybe a few examples of when you want to use which. Experience fragments are really good if you have content that is repeated on different pages, like teasers, maybe even a set of teasers. Like here we have in this example 3 different teasers, a title above. This group of components is maybe repeating on different pages, so you can create one experience fragment out of all these components. But you could also have created with each teaser a specific experience fragment, so that if it's just the teaser that is being repeated on different pages, you can have that centrally managed as well. And you can also cascade those. So if you have maybe the wish for having 2 layers of experience fragments, you can do that as well. Obviously, I don't recommend to go dozens of layers deep, but I think like 2, maybe 3 layers of embedding experience fragments can be okay, depending on your use cases. For content fragments, the examples are typically for everything where you have more structured content, where the content is defined by a set of fields. It can be like as simple as a frequently asked question, where you just have for every FAQ item a content fragment. So you would have for every content fragment, it would be a question and an answer field. It could also be typically for an article. Maybe you really want to have something like that, where you define the author, maybe some metadata about the article, an image of the article, location, maybe links and things like that. That could also all be defined in the content fragment definition of an article. Or events are also a good example. An event has a date, a location, maybe presenter list or things like that. These are all fields that you maybe want to create a content fragment for. All right, so this is for the experience in content fragments. I can maybe quickly show you an example here so that you have a little bit more demos here. So if I go to a page, I can go to any page, open it in the page editor, and I could then go in and take any content that I have here and convert it to experience fragment. So typically, if this teaser here on top, or maybe this one here on the bottom, would be, I want to isolate it as an experience fragment so that I can start to reuse it then on another page. I can go here, there is a button for that. I can convert it with that button, and then it's asking me a few things like, where do I want to store it? I don't have a very complex content structure here, so I would just place it probably here inside of my experience fragment structure. You can see that this is also something that you can localize. So here you can have the same localization structure than you have elsewhere. And I could create it here, typically inside of the English content. I can choose a template. This is important because the template is basically defining how this experience fragment will look like. So it's the template that will define the CSS that will be loaded so that I can really edit it properly. I maybe want to name it, like that would be, I don't know, camping in Australia or something like that. And I create it and I'm done. Now what I see is that this piece of content has been converted as an experience fragment component. And if I want to edit it, it's opening a new tab. And this is where I can now edit this content outside of the page where it is located. So it's opening the editor as a separate tab. Then I can also have a quick look at how content fragments work. And content fragments are interesting because they are stored as assets. So I need to go in the DAM structure, and there I can look for my website here. I have a number of content fragments that have created, like the adventures are created as content fragments. So here I see in a folder, I have everything that relates to one of the adventures that are presented on the website. I see the images as well as the content that relates together to this experience, to this adventure. And I can select here the content fragment. It's opening up in its own UI. And here I do see the different fields that I can edit for this adventure. You see that it's very strongly defining what I need to edit for every of these adventures. And this is, as an author, what I have to fill out to create an adventure. For both concepts, I have variations. So here on the left, I can create a new variation if I would like. So in specific case, maybe where I want to reuse this content, suddenly I see that some of this content maybe doesn't fit the context where I want to place it. So I could create a new variation and modify the content specifically for that place where I want to use it. All right, now.
So Gabriel, sorry to interrupt. We have a question from Lokesh, who's a board member at AGC, as well as to how scalable are these content fragments, right? As we look to scale these across multiple blogs and platforms, right? And how to do it, right?
So they have some APIs that are pretty scalable if you want also to ingest content. And so that basically you could use the JSON APIs. We'll come back to that as well for everything that is API here, more on the UI part. but so that you can really also scale the creation of that, maybe from a third-party system. You can have as many as you wish. Basically, there is no limit in AEM in creating content fragments. It's like assets. I mean, it scales like assets. Assets really scale well. There is no reason, I think, that I don't see the limits. I mean, obviously, on every project, you want to make sure that it's all properly scaled and sized, and that, I don't know, the number of requests you get really account for what the server can handle. But I cannot really give more guidelines here without getting into really the deep technical things here.
Cool, cool. Okay, so why don't you move forward? Sorry.
No problem. And the last thing I want to show you is basically that for the authoring, this is all really nice. Now we have really two ways how we can author things, but the issue that most of us have is when we do have an experience that is built entirely as a single page application. And I don't want to lose the authoring capability of this single page application. So most of the time we think that we have to use only content fragments for this single page application because it's all JSON output, right? So what can I use else than just content fragments for the content of my single page application? Well, I would like to show you what we have in AEM with the single page application editor. We have here a single page application. It's a journal application. We have implemented it with Angular and with React. So I'm taking here for the React version of it, and I'm opening the home page for that. And on the home page, I see a content application. It's mostly content-driven application here. It's could be any website actually. And to show you that this is really rendered front-end side, I will view it as published. And here we can navigate it around. So you see when I navigate, the URL is changing on top and it's loading really super quickly. So when I click on something, immediately I see the result. And this is really something that is quite specific for single page applications. And if we look at the source code, we actually see here that within the body of the page, I just have a placeholder and then the React scripts that are being loaded. That's all that happens here, and then the body is closed. So you would expect that I cannot edit that in AEM, because in AEM, we need the content to be rendered server-side, right? But no, this is something that I can fully author. So here I can go in, pick another image, and change that image here in the background without anything special of this being a single page application. I can do in-context editing here of this content and do whatever changes the same way that as if it would be server-side rendered. I can even do layouts. I can even take these components and move them around. Like if I go to here, I have them in 3 column. If I have another breakpoint, it would be 2 column and 1. I can go in and change that. Here I can resize these components. I won't break the layout now, but I could go in and do all the changes I want. This is all possible as if it would be a normal application. Obviously, I could drop in new components. I don't have a lot allowed here because the site is a little bit older, but it's all like a normal application. And what I would like to show you is how this is made possible. So basically, if I go back to my presentation, we use here the single page application JavaScript SDK. This is something that we provide for React and Angular, and that allows to build a front-end application that is fully authourable in AEM. The way this is possible is because we offer with this SDK a number of concepts to the client-side world, to the React and Angular world, that allow AEM to control the layout. First, we have a model router. So this is the box on the bottom left. Is basically when the visitor clicks something, this click is handled by a controller. And this is a JavaScript piece of code that will decide what happens with that click. And this controller must understand that the URL that has been clicked is not something that must be loaded as a separate page. It is content that is existing within AEM that can be loaded by the page model manager. So then we go to the page model manager, and that handles basically all the content that the client-side application has retrieved from AEM. And this page model manager understands which page it needs to get from AEM for that JSON content. And it will make then the request if it doesn't have that content to AEM. And AEM will return the content of that page as JSON. And then we have a little mapping script that understands in this JSON that is being returned from AEM to which component it has to map the rendering, so that it's basically knowing the AEM component, how the AEM components map to the React component. So every React component that you want to have editable in AEM, obviously needs to have in AEM a dialog. You need to have a dialog definition for that component in AEM, and you have a node in the content resource tree. In the JCR content, you have a node for that resource. And so that needs to be mapped to a JavaScript component, which JavaScript component is responsible for rendering that JSON, and it will pass it to that component. And then we have a number of components that are available, not very much so far. It's basically the basics that we have, like the page component, the container component, those that need to iterate over their children, we provide. But then how you want to implement a teaser component or a carousel component is so far really up to the implementation here. So you can do that however you want. And then we have a little HTML decorator that is basically just adding a data attribute if we are in an authoring environment. And so if we are in an authoring environment, the page editor that is loaded on a separate frame from the page will understand which components on the page are editable. So it will recognize within the DOM that the SPA has rendered, which are editable components that exist within AEM. And finally, we do have server-side rendering capability for AEM that can delegate either to the IO runtime or to a Node.js instance the rendering, so that you can still have also a single page application that still has also server-side rendering. So you can really mix and match both. And in that case, the same code that renders the single page application for the visitor is used to render the application server-side. So you don't need to rewrite two things there. You really write your code once, and if you need server-side rendering, your JavaScript code is executed also by AEM through a delegation to a node instance or the IO runtime, so that it gets the rendered HTML back. Yeah, you might think that this means that you need to build your application completely differently. Well, no, you still build the application exactly the same way. So this is here a small code extraction of how a React or an Angular component looks like. And it's really boilerplate standard codes that you have here that React or an Angular code would be used to do. And the only thing that is specific to AEM is this map-to concept here that tells that this component needs to map to a specific resource type here at the bottom for the AEM component. This is basically the only thing that needs to be specific when you build a React or an Angular component to AEM. And this can be done in a separate file so that your components could be maybe even used without AEM, outside of AEM in a different context. You could reuse the same React or Angular components. But when they are within the AEM context, you need to do this map-to call so that you have basically this mapping defined, and so that the page editor knows what dialog to open when you click on that component in the page editor. So yeah, that was for the authoring side. Now for the delivery side. The delivery side is actually fairly straightforward now with what you have understood, I think, because we have HTML output on the page and we have JSON output on the page. You know, you have saw that. But we also have HTML and JSON output on the experience fragment, and on the content fragment, we only have JSON output. The HTML output here on the page and on the experience fragment are really done the same way. The experience fragment is actually a page. So each variation of an experience fragment is a page. And so there is nothing special you need to do to get HTML rendition. If you just need an HTML snippet from an experience fragment, you could go and get that. That is working the same way as on a page if you would get that HTML output from the page. If you want to get the HTML output of a content fragment, you must place it on a page. So a content fragment cannot have an HTML output if it isn't placed on a page. You need to have that content fragment component on a page, and then the content fragment component will render some HTML for that content fragment that you embedded on the page. On the JSON side, you have JSON output really for all three types of content. For the page, we have the Sling model JSON API, which is not the JCR JSON API that we had previously. It is really an output of the Java logic that is processing the JCR properties, that is preparing them for rendering, for delivery. And so when you access that JSON, you really get the data in a format that is easy to use for your components. And it's basically the same properties and the same content that you get in HTML. So your HTML templates are consuming the output of Sling models, just like your React or Angular components would be consuming the same Sling model output. And so that you don't need to do any additional logic then on the client side that would be really maybe specific to AEM. Typically make sure that maybe a path is valid, or that you have maybe some fallback strategies for titles. So you maybe want, I don't know, to take the title of the teaser first. And if that hasn't been defined, you maybe take the title of the page and things like that. So these are things you really can do only on the AEM side, because on AEM side, you know, different content strategies that you want to put in place for fallback content and things like that, and cleaning up the data before you send it out to the front end. On the experience fragment, same thing. It's also a page. So the same thing you can do on the page, you can also do on the experience fragment. So you can also consume the JSON of the experience fragment the same way. But for the content fragments, it is different, because there we have an assets JSON API that is specific. And this is something that we need to have a closer look at. So the assets JSON content API is really not only for content fragments, but also for assets, for images and anything that is stored inside of AEM assets. And the purpose of that API is really to interface other backend systems. It's not purposed like the Sling model for delivery to visitors. It is something where you can read and write, and it is something that is quite verbose. So you really get all the details of that content fragment. So it's not something that you probably want to use for delivery. Also, it is not customizable. It is something that is really kind of a standard for AEM. The AEM defines that standard for all implementations, and all implementations have to use this format. On the other side, the Sling models, you can fully customize them, because Sling models can be implemented custom. You can extend the existing Sling models that we provide. So there you have the flexibility to annotate with some annotations in Java, which properties you want in the output, how you want them exactly, and things like that. And finally, when you look at all these outputs, you maybe think, what would be the best practice for JSON? And should I now, in my application, in my single page application, consume one or the other API here? And the recommendation here is really that you, in case of doubt, you really should consume the page JSON API. because the page JSON API is where the marketers can control what gets displayed for that specific channel. So if you would access directly the experience fragments, you would not know which variation now is really the one that the author has desired to display in the single page application. So you might need to actually access to hard code which variation you want to access in your application. And this is not really something that is desirable. So it is really on the page that the marketer makes the decision of which variation to display. And therefore it is really the JSON of the page that should be consumed, even for content fragments. So content fragments, you place them on the page and you maybe can create a list component, list of content fragment components. We have that. So you place that once, and each time you create new content fragments, this list is adding to the list that is rendered in the JSON, the new content fragment, or things like that. So this is the way how you should, in case of doubt, consume the JSON, unless you have a very specific use case here. All right, and now to finish, I just would like to give you a little bit of an overview how AEM is really giving you the best of both worlds. So if we consider now these two kind of dimensions where we can have headless or traditional delivery and headless or traditional authoring, we usually had this when we were working in the HTML world, where we could actually do in-context editing and form-based editing, sure, no problem. We usually choose in-context editing because it's nicer for the author, but there is also a lot of cases where for that delivery, content fragments can be useful. Still, now, if we go to a single page application, we usually want to go headless. And when we choose a headless CMS, we are actually having the JSON delivery, but we lose usually the in-context editing. We don't have a capability in headless CMS to do in-context editing. What we could still do is HTML rendering. If we have a node instance somehow, somewhere that is rendering our JSON, that could be possible. It's kind of additional work, but a lot of stacks provide that out of the box nowadays. So you can have HTML delivery actually, even if you go for a headless CMS. But what we really lose in a headless CMS is in-context editing. And with AEM, what we really get is all four possibilities. So even if we render JSON, we can have in-context editing. And we're not limited to the lower part or to the left part. We really can have also this upper right corner that is ticked. And so with that, I hope that you kind of see how the authors really can keep in control for the experience all the time in all situations. You have basically all the tools that are possible for all situations. You can deliver also all these situations. You can deliver HTML or JSON for everything. And you have a flexibility that is really maximal. You can do most things that you might need here. And the next steps, maybe quickly for you to go, if you're interested to dive deeper into this topic, we have a tutorial so that you can get started with building a React or an Angular application that is still fully authorable in context. But we also have a specific tutorial if you really want to go full headless, like headless authoring and headless delivery, kind of the headless CMS use case with AEM. This is the tutorial that you have in the middle. And if you just want to get started with a new project, we have the AEM project archetype that is fully packed with tons of features for you to bootstrap a new project with AEM. And the project archetype is the best place to get started with any AEM project, whether headless or headful. Thank you.
Cool. I think let's take a couple of questions. I think I have one question from Abdul Rashid on what is the best way to use an experience fragment within a non-AEM SPA page?
An experience fragment within a non-SPA page.
Non-AEM SPA page.
Oh, the way you want to use it from outside. Yes, if you have an existing single page application and you want to use that experience fragment, typically, yeah. This is typically one use case where you maybe want to point directly to the experience fragment in AEM. So it really depends then how far you want to get it. So The simplest way is really to just actually consume the HTML from the experience fragment of AEM and to embed it. It's not very beautiful. You embed that HTML piece of markup inside of your existing single page application. So it's not really rendered front-end side. So you have this piece of HTML that you insert in your DOM, and that's it. It works really well. It works, yeah. Now, if you want to take it a step further, you maybe want to also implement the components client side, but many times it's not worth the effort because you would need to re-implement then all the components that you make available within the experience fragment on your single page application. While in the first use case, all you just need to make sure is really that the CSS renders in your single page application that content properly. Otherwise, there is no additional work.
Cool. I think there are a couple more questions, and Gabriel, you can look at them also in the Q&A window. I think there's a question from Puneet on, is it possible to multi-select components in the page editor to include it into a new XF?
To multi-select components in the page editor, yes, you need to group them in a container. So we have a layout container component. You group your components inside of a layout container component, and then you convert the layout container to an experience fragment, and this will do the grouping. And then all these components are moved to the experience fragment. Yes.
Cool. I think there are a couple of questions from Theo. I think I'm just reading this out. Toto, do you have any case studies for clients using AEM Headless with anything else than a public site or app? Example, serving content to advertisers, serving content for print or other channels?
Yeah, not so many. It's not a common use case. I mean, we do have a lot of customers that do a lot of crazy things with AEM, and there are, yes, customers that do that as well. It is possible, and this is typically where you would probably want to use this. This is why we do have actually this content fragment assets JSON API, which is really good for interfacing third-party systems. So if it's not for delivery for the public site or application, yes, then you use this JSON API of the content fragment assets.
And I will read another question from Theo. At some point you said we should look into it in reference to the lack of flexibility with regards to JSON output for content fragments. Is that in the pipe for Adobe?
No, so the objective of the JSON output for the content fragments is really to be quite a standard. But what we're working on, and I cannot really disclose much on roadmaps here, but we are working on having there something that you could query with GraphQL so that you could actually have more flexibility on consuming these content fragments through JSON with GraphQL.
Cool, I am getting some more questions. Yeah. Hey, Amit, can you just read some of these questions? My
Sure.
browser
So one more question we can take is from Tyrita Fariba. Since AMP pages do not allow JavaScript, can we use content fragment or experience fragments to render AMP pages?
Sorry, which one is that?
So this is from Tyrita Fariba.
Yep.
It's in the chat window, not the question window.
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry, I was. Can you read it again then?
Yeah. So the question is, since AMP pages do not allow JavaScript, can we use content fragment or experience fragment to render AMP pages?
I'm not sure to understand. I need to look at the chat pod. Give me a second. There we go. Because AMP pages do allow to load JavaScript. I'm not sure to understand here. AMP, sorry, yeah, correct. So AMP, maybe for AMP, I can do a little bit of a sneak peek here. We have the core components that are providing very soon an AMP feature. Just having some trouble with the, see the mouse device. Here we go. So the core components, you can see the roadmap of the core components is actually disclosed here. And we're working on an AMP feature for the core components. We have a pull request here that has been merged. And you can actually try it out already if you go to the development branch of the core components. Then you will see an extension AMP. And this is adding AMP support to the core components. And so the way it works is that there will be an AMP selector that is added to the pages that request it, and it will provide the AMP output. Now, the way the JavaScript is being added here is really through the AMP. AMP is defining which JavaScript we can add. So Google is creating these JavaScripts typically for a carousel and things like that. So this is the amount of JavaScript that you can use. And if you want now to consume in this AMP component or in this AMP website an experience fragment, then the experience fragment should need to be built with components that support AMP output. So it could really work well here. With content fragments, you need to, in the AMP output of your components, you basically need to consume the content of the content fragments. Yeah, not sure if I answered the question.
Thanks, Gabriel. There's one more question we can take. I think this looks like an interesting question. So, how about GraphQL? Okay, there's a question on GraphQL. So this is from Anish Timela.
Mm-hmm.
I know AEM is planning for GraphQL implementation in upcoming releases. How can that be leveraged to retrieve content referencing content in Headless?
That I think will come in a next step. I'm not sure exactly I'm not sure that it will be available in the first version. But yeah, exactly. The objective would be to be able to do that as well. And for now, it is focused also on content fragments, but obviously we will also at some point want a GraphQL interface for pages. Yeah.
Okay. Another question is from Glenn Bosi. There are limited set of data types provided by content fragments. Are there any plans that it will be able to support more complex content types like composite multi-field?
Yeah, we were working on that, yes.
Okay. How about we take another question? This question is from Murali Krishna Bemi Reddy. We have different headless CMS, headless methodologies like Sling Model Exporter, Custom Servlet Framework, X7 Experience Fragment, content fragments of OTB feature. Can you please suggest which one to choose and its pros and cons and suggestible for serving to mobile apps?
So for mobile, it really depends on the mobile application you need to build. And it also depends how, it really depends. It's hard to suggest one, because if the mobile application needs to render that with a native Chrome, then you probably want to have a very structured approach. So you probably want to consume content fragments because you really want this application it expects a certain number of fields, right? In an application, if you have typically the native UI that's creating specific fields and specific text widgets on the screen, that it must know exactly what to fill it for. And it's hard in a mobile application to have a concept like a paragraph system. You could imagine, but it's usually in the mobile application, you have a much more structured approach. So you want to consume content fragments. Still, I would consume the content fragments through a page so that the authors can define on the page what content fragments are actually published for that channel and in which variation. So I would create, either have a system that maybe auto-generates the pages needed from the content fragments, or that it's using content fragment list component or something like that.
Carry on, and with that, Bryce, the stage is all yours. Thank you so much, everyone.
Awesome. Now, I first want to say thanks, Gabriel. That was a fantastic presentation. There's a lot of great changes going on there. I know we're starting to use a lot of the experience fragments, content fragments on the current project I'm helping out with. The content fragments especially are great for like legal approved text. So text that's gone through legal approval, been audited, that you might want to use on multiple places across your site, and be able to update it and update it across your site or your applications seamlessly. So fantastic presentation. Also, thanks to the Adobe Global community for hosting this event, and really all the AEM meetups around the world that they're helping to organize. I think this is fantastic to get this community together here. And especially, thank you to Amit for all the late nights that he's putting in around the clock, and bringing this community of developers, implementers, marketers together here. It's an honor for Arbery to be a part of this group here. So we founded Arbery 2019, and just a services company to bring deep level AEM expertise to the market. We previously built out a large 24/7 hosting support team, and really wanted to branch out into the delivery aspect. We saw sort of a gap in senior leadership within the space. And my partners and I have been specializing in AEM for more than a decade. Actually, you can sort of see on the screen, my first project was doing a 4.2i to 5.2.5 migration. Since that, I've done about, hundreds of implementations for Fortune 500 companies. We try to hone in on performance and security configurations of AEM. So really getting deep into the JVM tuning, heat-based tuning, tuning of the disk I/O. You can be a lot of bottlenecks in the disk I/O, and so focusing on tuning at that level of the AEM performance. Also, we've done projects sort of across everywhere. So, I'm working directly hand in hand with Adobe Managed Services currently. We've supported self-hosted, dedicated cloud, AWS, Azure, GCP implementations. And actually a couple beta tests on Alibaba as well, which was fun to work out some kinks there. Real quick highlight of the first mobile application is it's definitely before the SPA days and before these experience fragments, but it was right after the PhoneGap acquisition. So it was fun to work on those integrations there. And build out a mobile application that the content was within AEM and managed in there, and then an application published out for iPhone and Android. And so a couple services that we support. So really deep level expertise, leadership, management, architectural advice. But we're happy to provide any type of consulting services in regards to advisory. Whether you're trying to choose vendors or trying to decide how to take your AEM project to the next level, or really working on migrations, maybe from TeamSite or SharePoint or any other platform to really what is the industry best content management system right now, Adobe Experience Manager. We're happy to come in and do a quick health assessment. Check out just as far as upgrading and modernizing your AEM implementations, cloud migrations, or really talk through your strategies and processes as regards to development or really content generation. And happy to be partners with Adobe as well as the AGC and bringing training practices to the market.
Well, thank you, Bryce. We have one question from Stephanie Soller from Kaiser. Do you have expertise on Adobe Forms?
Sure. A lot of AEM form implementations, especially in regards to installation and tuning of those. But I've led a couple projects as well as some forms development. It's a pretty heavy product that it's getting a lot better by the day. Initially, it was sort of a server within a server, the way the implementation went. The one gotcha is that when you're tuning it is the crypto support startup can really take your AEM startup time. Like AEM out of the box usually was about on a well-tuned system, maybe about a minute startup. And initially when you'd install forms, it would take that up to maybe about 9 minutes of startup time. So a lot of people felt like the servers were crashing, their servers were stalled, and really there's a couple third-party tools you can install and plug in. But it was doing a lot of cryptography, random generation at the beginning, at the startup initially, and they've worked through a lot of those kinks now. It's becoming a lot more mature of a product, but that was a big headache for people initially with AEM forms on top of the AEM stack.
Okay. So Bryce, if Stephanie wants to get in contact with you, what's your email, or do you have your contact information?
Sure. Actually, you can just, so our website's arborydigital.com or arbory.digital. We love our AEM 4502 1877 number. But also feel free to reach out at info@arborydigital.com. Okay,
wonderful. And Stephanie just sent her email, so I'll connect you with Stephanie, and then you guys.
Excellent, thanks. Hey, yeah, thanks again, Gabriel, for that presentation. I thought that was fantastic. I liked going into the code that you guys are working on, the core components as well. We're starting to leverage a lot of those, and it's fantastic to see some of that stuff going open source and being available via GitHub. So it's good work you guys are really putting in.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Ahmed, for sure.
Yeah,
for
thanks
putting
everyone.
together.
We're running out of time, so see you next month, everyone.
Take care.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks everyone. Take care.
Bye.